The topic I will be discussing is science versus pseudoscience. Let's start with science. So, science is validly presented as sound science only after going through rigorous peer review. So as you can see there, scientist Mark is giving his journal to his peers to review. This is science. Science is driven only by evidence. Without evidence, it isn't science. For example, evidence can come from magazines, texts, journals, websites, books, and so much more. Science experiments can test your if-then question or your hypothesis and can also verify and replicate your results. For example, another scientist could test your experiment and see if your data was correct. In order to do these things, science is unbiased or shows no opinion. Also, science follows the data. Science also advocates or supports peer skepticism, review, and critique. So, in other words, science is open-minded and promotes other people to review their work. Science is knowledge and facts, so the knowledge can be revised, modified, and built upon, because evidence can change their minds. Lastly, tentative science is at the starting point of peer review and hasn't been widely tested yet, so it will only become science after it goes through rigorous peer review. So, if they advocate and accept rigorous peer review and testing, then it becomes science. Now for pseudoscience. So, pseudoscience is just the opposite of science, and that it is falsely presented as sound science without going through the rigors of peer review. Pseudoscience is not driven by evidence. Instead, it is driven by cultural or commercial goals. Unlike science, pseudoscience cannot test your if-then question and can't even verify and replicate your results. So, another scientist could not replicate your experiment to see if your results were correct or incorrect. So, pseudoscience is biased or includes opinion. It cherry-picks data or only chooses the data that they think is positive or beneficial. Pseudoscience also suppresses or rejects peer skepticism, review, and critique. So in other words, they are closed-minded. Their beliefs are not revised, modified, or built upon, as it is only based on their faith and opinions. So nothing can change their minds, not even evidence. Lastly, pseudoscience changes in two different ways: when sensitive science is falsely presented as science, and when claims cannot be tested experimentally. So, rigorous peer review is not possible. So, tentative science becomes pseudoscience if they suppress or reject rigorous peer review and testing. Now, let's compare these two because they do have some things in common. For both science and pseudoscience, they publish information in books, websites, texts, journals, magazines, periodicals, and so much more. They both use scientific concepts and terminology, like, for example, data, variables, laws, theories, and so much more. Also, the public must evaluate how credible the information is that is presented in different sources. Now for some examples. An example of science is biology, because there is evidence behind biology in experiments that have been tested and replicated. But an example of pseudoscience is Bigfoot, because there has been no evidence to prove Bigfoot is real, only beliefs and opinions. An example of science is physics, whereas an example of pseudoscience is psychics. Another example of science is paleontology, whereas an example of pseudoscience is aliens. A last example of science is astronomy, whereas the last example of pseudoscience is astrology. So, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned the differences and similarities between science and pseudoscience. Remember, science is driven by evidence and can be tested. It also goes through rigorous peer review. On the other hand, pseudoscience is driven by beliefs or cultural or commercial goals, not evidence. Cannot be tested and replicated. And does not go through the rigorous peer review. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.